All right, so I'm Armin Smailhodzic. This is
Willie, Hight.
And we're going to talk about some vendors. How many of you know how many vendors you actually have that you deal with? How many vendors? 15.
Ooh.
I don't know the numbers. We track it as a department, but it's hundreds.
Okay. So it's 15. You're lucky. Well, this is great. Like, I think we're up to what? Almost 4,000 now?
With the additional companies.
Yeah, so we just merged, so we're up to about 4,000 vendors.
Who's we?
ShareCare, Healthways.
And a whole slew of other companies.
Yeah. So about 11, 12 different companies fall under that umbrella. All right. So it's going to be our outline. We're going to start out with a little about us. Why do we care about vendor security and why other people we think should care? Then we're going to go through an example or sample process of healthcare, how we do it in healthcare. Not really specifics, more of a broad overview. And then hopefully at the end we'll have some time for questions and discussion. We'll try to make this a little more interactive. We'll ask you guys questions. We hope you'll answer those. It'll be kind of a learning community. All right, moving on. All right, about us. I am the T-Rex in this situation. And this was our Christmas event at work. They have ugly sweater contests, so, well, Willie has a wife, so she made him a sweater. I have Amazon, so I was a T-Rex. All right, you can talk about yourself first, Willie.
So Willie Hight, I've been in IT probably close to 19 years. I've been in information security about 13, 14 years. I've worked as a consultant starting out, and I liked the contracting, and then I met a girl, and she wanted like benefits and all that kind of stuff, so I had to get a permanent job, and I landed at Deloitte, worked with this gentleman back here for about 6.5, almost 7 years, and I was in administration, went from that to risk and compliance, and now at Healthways, which is bought by ShareCare, I am working in the Information Security Administration and Compliance, a team lead. And, we have a lot of work on our tables, and vendor security management is definitely one that has pretty much captivated the eyes of leadership. And of course, in businesses, especially healthcare businesses, it's a pretty important part of your day. So,
I'm Armin Smailhodzic. I usually never say my last name. I'm go with Smith or just Armin. So before I joined information security, I actually started in physics. So I have a bachelor's and master's in physics. Did teaching before this. So after I got kind of bored, so I decided, hey, security looks pretty cool. I'll join information security. Got a chance on the administration compliance side. Luckily, teaching is just like dealing with grown-ups. They always bicker, and you have to figure out how to make them interested in what you're saying. So the best way to make people interested is, hey, this is how much money we could potentially lose if something happens with this vendor. So started with compliance administration, moved over to the SOC, but still work a lot on the vendor security side of things.
So why are we here? Sometimes vendors, when we think about vendors, we just think about like partners, people that actually physically show up and physically have access to your facility. But there's so many different suppliers now. There's a lot of people who are at companies that are mid-sized to large. They use what we call P cards or purchase cards, and they're engaging in vendor relationships without going through the proper process just because they take the card and they get a software as a service agreement, and all of a sudden now your data is in many places that you haven't authorized because they have the ability to do that. There's a lot of implications to that. We'd be violating our own policies, but we also are, if you're dealing with customers and you're dealing with other like partners, you actually have to make sure that your policies, your procedures, the things that you adhere to, these vendors also adhere to. And you'll find out that your vendors have vendors, and you have to ensure that those vendors adhere to that. And doing that is definitely like not a small feat at all. So there's so many different areas where we could be financially responsible. We could have a bad situation where our name is just, downtrodden because of how we are engaging and not actually getting the vendors to adhere to our stuff. We're not enforcing rules and the legal impacts that are involved in that, the contractual obligations, that's again back to the customer thing, and then human safety. Sometimes, that's our greatest asset, but sometimes that's one of the last things we consider and think about when we go into these engagements, because money is what talks.
All right, let's jump into our example. So how many of you know that your company purchases software from anybody? How many of you know what questions you're asking those software vendors? Or do you ask them anything? Or like Willie said, hey, here's a P card. Let me buy 50,000 licenses of whatever this is. So if you were talking to this software vendor, what kind of questions would you ask? What are important questions for you to know about that vendor? Anybody? So
I'm actually a vendor.
Okay.
I'm a sales engineer for Carbon Black. So we are a software vendor. It's interesting. I'm sitting here, I've written down a question, what do you measure for your vendors? Mm-hmm. Because I answer RFPs all the time, and it's exceedingly rare to actually get questions about our security. Mm-hmm. It's quite uncommon for me to see that in RFPs. I usually get technical questions. I usually don't get organizational security questions from RFPs that I answer. It's really rare.
I believe that's because it's not new, but we've been engaging with building relationships with other people to expand and enhance the practices. But what is new is that a company was held responsible for something that a sub-company, a business associate did, and that had financial implications, and that began to scare people when companies, when they see that, okay, something that I'm attached to could actually ruin my reputation, could actually ruin relationships, and possibly even, have criminal, consequences to it. So because of that, there's hundreds, if not, depending on the size of your organizations, thousands of vendors that pre-exist this whole process, what we call vendor security today. And it's not common for them to ask you about your security posture, because it's like, does what you're selling work? That's what they're focused on. It's and from a business point, security is supposed to support the business, and these business leaders have said, hey, Carbon Black, this is what we need. Let's do it. Sign it. Move forward. And sometimes we find out about it after the fact. And it's like, okay, now you need to call them, and you're moving on to somebody else. You're not interested in talking to me. You don't want to tell me about your security posture and all of this kind of stuff. So I have to find clever ways to build a relationship with you, and at the same time evaluate you, and do it in a manner that's not going to be too imposing on you.
It's a non-individual test.
Not yet. All right. So as a vendor, you said you guys don't usually, security questions aren't really asked of you.
It's uncommon. Maybe. I would even say 10% of the RFPs that I read. And I'm getting RFPs for when we're engaging with a new customer is less than 50% of the deal. It is so less than 5% of the times that I sell software do I actually have to answer security questions.
The software that you sell, is it just off-right? Do you have a option for on-premise? Do you have an option for cloud?
Yes.
Do you have maintenance agreements that comes along with it? Would you ever need to have access to the facilities or the hardware or software of the network?
Typically not.
Okay. Yeah. So software companies are not usually looked at as a vendor. But when you get into engagements where you actually, let's say, hire Carbon Black to come in and implement this, you're paying them for that, they're going to need network access. They're going to need access to your facility. And it's like, oh, we're thinking it's a quick install, but our customers don't think that way. HIPAA doesn't think that way. We have to have background checks for our employees, so why would we stop when you get a third party in place, a software person? It's like, oh no, they're not HP, they're not consultants that are going to do work on our behalf. It's not augmentation. It's just software. But software comes with people and needs, and sometimes those needs impose on your territory. And so we have to be just as vigilant to protect, just like we would do with people who we would directly hire.
So any other questions? So from a vendor's point of view, hardly any security questions are ever asked. So as a business, what would you like to know about your software vendor?
I go off of what you were saying. I want to know how much they were supporting that system. That would really, I think, dictate my questions. It's just, and you're purchasing like something off the shelf, and then you are managing it. I probably wouldn't have a ton, but maybe how robust is like the patches process that you release, but they are hosting any part of it. I'm going to want to know, one, that they have a pretty robust access control process. Make sure you don't have someone exploiting maintenance hooks or something like that.
Perfect.
Well, these are demarcation lines. This is what we're responsible for, this is what you're responsible for.
Yeah.
Make sure they're clearly established.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I'm a developer, so when I get a tool, one of the things we have to say is, well, is this going to introduce me? Is this going to cause more problem than it's going to solve? And one of the questions we have to ask is, if we do find a problem, what's their obligation on fixing it? What are the timelines? In the case of security issue, do we have, what's their service level agreement? What is their response time on? Who are we going to be working with? Do we have a named contact that when we pick up the phone, they see it's our number on there. They're going to pick up the phone and say, what do you need? How do you respond? And does that kind of response require more money?
Yeah.
Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's worth paying for it, even if you go with BSides.
Yeah. It's
Exactly.
good stuff.
Yes, sir.
So one question, because I get it on both sides. I'm a vendor, but I also have vendors. So I have to deal with either Microsoft, AWS, whatever, on one side. But I'm noticing that on the questions I'm getting, it's changing. Like 2 years ago, very few questions. Last year, probably 50 or so.
Okay.
So I'd say probably half of the engagements. And this year, it's easily 85%.
Nice.
So and then the level of questionnaires is changing. With you guys in the environment you're in, are you noticing, are your rules constantly changing? It's getting more in depth than it was probably 3 years ago?
I've been at Healthways for 5 years, and the process happened 1 year after, so our process is only 4 years old. And cloud was not a big forerunner or discussion piece in the beginning. It was more of, are you going to need network access? Are you going to need facility access? And just talk about your actual security posture. Like, what does your team look like? What does your privacy posture look like? But now, let's say like 2014, 2015, it became more and more of a requirement. We sometimes do things because it's just industry standard, and then other times we do things because some of the people that are, providing the most income to us, that like big deal, that big relationship that you have, they require it. So, we weren't required to be high trust. High trust wouldn't even have been in our vocabulary, but, Anthem and the different ones that we have relationships with, they required it. So it's like now we require it, and now we have to require our vendors to require it, and we want them to require their vendors to require it. And it's not a really... So it's definitely changing, and I think many of that's just because of the intense attention and auditing that's happening from HHS Gov, or whatever it's called, and the big things that we see in the news. Like no one wants to have to fork out $10-20 million just to satisfy some sort of like breach, and then you have to rebuild your whole reputation. There's that $10 or $12 million. That's just the beginning. That's not even talking about all of the forensic costs that you had, all of the workers that you have, working on this attention, and then all the corrective actions. It's like you can, let's say it's a $10 million breach, but by the time it's all over and done, if you look at the past costs and the future costs and all the requirements, that's probably like $120 million. And if you're not making a whole lot of revenue, that could close shop. And that's why people care. That's why they're asking all these extra questions. And that's why they're putting the responsibilities more and more on the people who actually have these relationships.
So here is a set of sample questions that we ask our vendors. They'll lead into the big 3 questions that we ask. So one of the key questions that we want to know is, are you going to store, transmit, or access the company's data? So if you're in healthcare, we deal with PHI all the time. If you're going to access our data, we need to ask you some more questions. So also, are you going to host? So are you going to host the software, or are we going to host the software internally? So also, are you going to supply us with a couple of contractors? How long is that contract going to last? How long? So, like you were discussing earlier, if we host it, fine. If you're hosting it, or if we need you to come and install it for us, how long is that going to take? What kind of background checks do you do on your people? What kind of training do you give those people? So is it a software as a service? Will any third-party or external software admin access be required? So at that point, we'll also need to start including you in our audit process. So every quarter, we're like, okay, well, these are the people that have access to this from the external side. We'll reach out to you. We'll ask, hey, are any of these people no longer on this contract?
Yep.
So we can remove their access. Also, in our contract, we'll actually include, hey, we need you to let us know when someone is terminated that is working for us or on our contract, so we can remove all their access immediately. We've come into a lot lately. People are buying freeware or open source software. They're just like, I can just install this. It's free. I don't need to tell you I have this. So it's getting in touch with our developers because, well, usually developers are the first people to install tools and try them out. So it's like, hey guys, even if it's free, we still need you to tell us as much information as you can about this. You install something, it might no longer have support, like CentOS 05, last week or the week before. Like, hey, some of you might still have this. Why? Like, we didn't know about this until we're looking through the network, maybe doing like an internal pen test. We're like, oh, there's like 15 of these servers out here for some reason.
And our legal group was identifying that even though it's like freeware, open source, sometimes it's just that if you're doing it on a small level, but they're like enterprise versions, and it's like, yeah, it was free until, and now it's no longer free, and by the way, we're taking you to court. So yeah, that's another reason why you just want to dot all your I's and cross all your T's and ensure it is what it is.
And then obviously, will you support any customers of ours with the software? At that point, we have to also include our customer requirements. So if all our customers are like, hey, everything you do from now on, you need to push HITRUST, a software company is probably not going to be like, well, I don't know how we're going to get Hight certified as a software company, but we're going to have to push that down the line, as Willie said earlier. And then usually the first thing we ask is, so do we have software that already met our requirements? Are you just going out there because my friend told me I should use this so we can work on the same project later? Or do we already have a tool in place that does everything you need except for that one functionality where now the toolbar is purple and you just want it to look different? So we ask people that, and then if they're like, well, we have something similar, then we need them to state a business case. Then we start including their manager and their VPs. And as soon as you start including people's higher ups, they're like, well, we don't really need this software anymore. We'll just, we'll do what you have. Yes.
So the last but one question, right? Have you confirmed this to existing company software? That's not exactly security related, right? It's more
organization related.
Yeah, this process here, and then I think we'll get to it on another screen. This is not really a security function. It's like you're integrating a lot of pieces all together. As a procurement, beginning, we start where the money is, we end where the money is. But then you got privacy involved in this. This is legal. This is information security. It's a lot of different roles involved in this evaluation.
What part of the organization do you two fall
I fall into information security, which is under BT, what they call business technology, IT, and the real, it's a real world there, but in the real world, IT is more familiar.
Yeah, and then our biggest task was just including all the other departments. So financial, legal, procurement, contracting. So to us, financial is the key player in everything. As long as you can get the people that are giving out the money to be like, well, whenever someone's requesting something, they need to go through security. We just tunnel everyone through there. It makes our process a little easier. As we said, we had issues with P cards. Everyone has issues with P cards. You hand those out to people and you don't know what's being charged until you get an inventory sent a month later to finance, and they're like, when did we buy this vendor? Why are they here? So it's getting finance on board was our biggest goal, and now that we've been purchased, our goal again is to make sure everyone across the board in finance is like, okay, security requires this. This is going to help us in the long run. It might slow things down, but we need to do this. And then last but not least, who's going to pay for this? What department do you belong to? Who can we talk to verify that you actually need this? Or who can we talk to escalate to make sure you don't want to buy this anymore? All right, vendors. So vendors, software suppliers, kind of falls in the same group. We split it up. Well, we do software. Gets that pre-questionnaire. And then vendors have their own as well. So let's start with, if you have 15 vendors, Mr. Sir, I'm the luckiest man on the planet right now. What type of questions do you guys usually ask them as you're starting to get involved with that engagement?
Well, the first thing, like we said before, is what kind of data are we talking about? If it's web conferencing, then usually I'll just ask for a SOC report, and from there, then that usually answers most of the questions. It's the open source stuff that we're talking about, and making sure that the license is really, we're following the license. WinZip is not supposed to be used by enterprises without a license, those kinds of things. So that's more of what it is. And so yeah, for me, it's just a bunch of SaaS services that I have to keep track of.
One of the key things we do is classify risk to our company. Depending on the vendor, we have to classify the risk. We'll talk about that in a little bit with a couple more slides. Any of you, how does your company or your information security team classify risk based on vendors? Because a vendor is just risk, or there's a high, low, medium, any?
Data handling function. What type of data handling, what they do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what happens if they disappear? How big a risk is it? Does it impact our bottom line if this vendor goes out of business, it's GoToMeeting, then you just switch over to WebEx. It's not a big deal. There's a little bit of pain, but it's not an impact. If it's some kind of hosting company, then you're probably going to have a lot bigger impact.
Sure, something else.
So you have like a number of customers that it could impact. So
Volume.
So we're an insurance company. Depending on the number of claims that they process for us, it's bigger.
Okay, makes sense. And yeah, next question obviously goes to that. Will they require access or process your data with insurance? I'm sure your vendors get all the data to process, help with that. Same thing with healthcare. Our vendors are always touching our member data, so protecting that. And one of the questions that people don't usually think about a lot is, does location matter? Does the location where your vendor is, or their support staff, or their data centers actually matter to the company?
Yeah, like we don't get into the weeds of contracts. Like we said, we're information security. And it's like, oh, we approved something. We sign off on it. We've approved it. It's okay. But, oh, this customer that utilizes these services that we just got this vendor for, they have an issue with anybody that's outside of the U.S., and they primarily want certain types of jobs or roles to be within their own state. So we've like violated on multiple cases. Was like, but you know they're ISO certified, and they so it's like so.
It could be something as simple as what I know the support center can. Okay? My organization is very, very local. Okay? So if we get somebody, a vendor who has his support centers on the far west coast, okay, they're not coming online until we're 2 hours, maybe 3 hours into the day. And we have very, very powerful, very loud people that are having a problem, and in doing this kind of analysis before anybody signed the contract helps head off a whole lot of uncomfortable discussions later on.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
That's key. Before it's also one of my Christmas wishes.
You kind of touched on this in some of your earlier comments, but this in the third bullet there about access and process your data. But are they going to access and process your assets, your own network? You've got to be just all right checks that make your internal people come through. Or you basically said you can only connect with a company configured or a company image laptop with this client and so on. Or you also going to hold the vendor to that. And the ICS world, for instance, we encourage it. We basically say it's a better policy to give them a laptop to work on, re-image it when they're gone, rather than bringing their laptop from all the other sites that they support onto your site and giving them access behind several layers, usually of corporate protections. So those sort of things, they're best worked out beforehand as part of the contract.
Exactly.
And an upfront agreement. Maybe there's a subset of people that you want to use to allow on your site, as opposed to anybody that's in the service department, for instance. Right. You want to vet the people individually, and you want to know who's on the other side. It gives some kind of means of knowing what's on the other side and what kind of software controls that they're going to have when they want to access your network. Or even if they're going to access your data, you're going to send data to them, they're going to put it in a private sandbox and do the development on it. It's going to come back to your site. How do you ensure that it doesn't have another something with it?
Yep. It's good. It's very good.
So does location matter in your support question? It amazes me how many times I see customers opt for a less expensive support option that is super constrained, 8 to 5 support for a piece of software that can shut down your entire network. You've got to be kidding me. And then all of a sudden, the crap hits the fan, and then it's 9 o'clock on a Friday night, and it's like, well, your support doesn't warrant that. Yeah. But then that's probably not go rattle some drums and get them that support. But it's amazing how many customers will opt for it.
And I've been on the other side explaining to a stakeholder, it's like, you got your P card? Because you're going to need it now. Oh, boy, you're going to have a lot of fun on the next annual.
Yeah, I'm sure those last second supports aren't cheap.
And, like, thankfully, we tend to do the right thing as an organization, but it creates friction, right? Go ahead and pay the extra X number of dollars per host and get it so that when you need it, it's there.
Yeah. And going off your questions a second ago, these are usually the 3 key questions that we ask. So this is what we initiate with the vendors, well, in our VP. So does the vendor software supplier require physical access to the facility? Does vendor software supplier require network access? And will they store, access, review, all our stuff, all the data? So if you answer yes to the first question, no to the other ones, we'll give you a badge. But that's only if, like, you're doing maintenance in the building.
Which still comes with the agreement, or we used to have a quiz, but they don't like that anymore. So now it's just an agreement, and, you know, they read and sign. It's like an NDA kind of.
So we start all our security reviews with the software intake, and then we have another intake form, and then we move on to these 3 questions. So based on how these get answered and what type of data they're looking at, we give them a pre-ranking. So the types of data classifications that we look at are public, restricted, confidential, and internal data classifications.
Yeah, so the data classifications is along the line of just trying to understand what is what. Like, I think it's better to ask about the data descriptions, because everybody has their own interpretations of what PHI is or PII is. You know, Google has this interpretation, and the Webster Dictionary has this interpretation. At our company, member data is considered PHI. So anything that a customer provides you, you know, is considered PHI, and we do that just to protect it at the highest degree and ensure we're doing our due diligence. But these data classifications, for us as security professionals, if we have data descriptions and we can see, if it's public, it's just something that, you know, if it's lost, it's lost. There's no harm in that. Restricted is usually dealing with the customer data or like your employees, like personal information or banking information, their medical information, their address. Confidential is proprietary. It's like specifics. It's about business dealings. It's about, you know, this new project. It's supposed to, you know, take healthways from one level to another level. That type of information you don't want your competitors to know about. And then internal, it's just it's still information that is like useful to you. Procedures, processes that you have in place, and just internal data like about the company, about events, about different things like that. So these are the things that we use to like kind of understand how we're going to evaluate even further. Yes.
So with this, does your vendor answer this, or do you have your business users answer?
So those key questions, they start off with internal people. Whoever wants the software or a supplier, those 3 key questions start off with them. And then this data classification is like, this is how data is classified in our organization, and this is how we have to evaluate like what type of data is going to be a part of that engagement. So there's an internal questionnaire that's happening, and it's providing us information. And sometimes you can ask them and say, hey, is it this, that, or the other? But that's dangerous because they don't know. So you should ask for elements, like give me examples of what type of data you're going to be dealing with, and I'll make the call to classify it in the profile.
Yes.
Do you provide this classification to your vendors in the RFP?
Do we provide this? Well, like a request for proposal?
Yeah.
That,
Okay, you know, these basically is the definition of terms. This is how we're going to classify our data that you may be dealing with. And that way, when you're putting together your RFP, you can get an idea. Oh, this is going to, you know, our product is going to be dealing with what we call restricted data. So that way you guys are talking the same language.
oh, I see what you said. Yeah, the security requirements document, that would be like spelled out, like how we refer to whatever exchange of information.
I've been on projects where that wasn't worked out ahead of time. Again, because it's long and comfortable meeting, and it just causes friction. Once everything's settled out, everybody's cool. But until then, there are vice presidents and various people calling and yelling. It's not fun.
Yes.
I've worked in finance for about 10 years, and I find that my users, and I make sure that they understand that I don't think they're dumb because they don't do what I do every day. As long as they don't expect me to be able to deal with financial markets, like ever. They know that stuff. I know my stuff, and I try my best to communicate with them. I find that they are a lot of binary individuals who want to take that list of 4 items and divide it into 2 categories: important and not important. And so they'll in their brains, they'll say, I'm not going to worry about public information, I can get that off the internet. And that internal stuff is just that internal stuff. And it took a vulnerability assessment from a pen tester for me to get through to them that internal stuff is what allowed you to be socially engineered. So it's important to classify that data as important to them because they may not understand why, right? They may not understand that knowing who's the vice president of IT, who's the CISO, who, just knowing those names thrown out there could be a vulnerability.
So it sounds like so much. Share.
Their thing, like my thing.
Yeah, so we started off with asking them to do this in 2013, and we removed it in 2014, and now we go back to them with our pre-assessment of the vendor. After you give me all the information, you give me your data descriptions, I'm going to tell you this is restricted data, and this is why it's restricted data based off of the data elements that you gave me. And in that encounter, we used to ask the business owner to pass on this vendor security questionnaire to the third party. Now we do it ourselves as well, but we still have to let them know, hey, this is a process, this is why this is happening. And it has struck up conversations because there's some people out there that are not very familiar with PHI and PI, and there's some that come from companies and they're fully aware. It's like, no, this is not PHI. And it's like, well, welcome to Healthways. It's PHI because everything that's customer related. Yeah. But that is important to have those conversations so that you're on the same page and hopefully never have a violation.
Yeah. So once we do that internal questionnaire with just our business owners and they answer our questions and figure out what the classification is, we move on to our pre-rankings. So we do pre-rankings and post-rankings. So we'll give it a pre-low, pre-medium, pre-high, pre-critical. So pre-low, you just need physical access. We can give you a badge, you take a test, or you agree to our standards. Then depending on, obviously data classification, we move up in ranking, so medium, high, critical. Depending on the ranking, depends on what type of secondary questionnaire we're going to send to the vendor. So first we deal with our business owners, figure out what they know about this vendor, how they plan on using them. And then we find a point of contact with the vendor and we start reaching out to the vendor. So we have 2 different questionnaires. We have one for low and medium. It's about 30 questions. And it also asks for evidence for some things. And then high and critical, we bump that up to about 70 questions.
I think maybe some of you are familiar with the SIG, Standard Information Gathering Document from HALE. Like it has like so many questions about so much stuff in there, and it's overkill in my opinion. It is definitely useful, and it is definitely something that is working for a lot of people. But the quicker you can get to the meat of this relationship that you have with the people that you're working with, the better you'll come away with it. Because I can have an incredible security program and really suck in other areas, or might have not vetted the new security professional that's on my team, and my incredible security program is in trouble, and I don't know this yet. I'm not HR. I'm not doing background screenings. I don't know Russell was coming into my business to steal all of our data and give it to China. I'm just like, these.
It's on camera. We got you.
But yeah, it's the way you go about getting the information. You know, it's on you, and it's on your company and on your resources. Sometimes, you know, utilizing a external third party to help you do that, creating internal questions that are more applicable to align up with what you're required to adhere to is probably better than buying something off the shelf that's, you know, 50% of it doesn't even apply to you, but you're asking your supplier, your vendor, the software company, to complete something that you wouldn't complete yourself. So that's just something to consider with your external questionnaires.
But and I want to say this real quickly, if you don't mind. I won't brag on these guys for a minute because I worked with them both for a number of years, and the process they developed, which is what they're describing here, is workflow and logic based, where you have base questions, then based on the response to those questions, you have different questions. Is so much more efficient, and I worked for a much larger organization after I left there, and we don't have anything even close to that. And we just pretty much just dump a light stick, like what you described, on the vendor's lab and say, here, this is our controls, fill this thing out. 90% of it's not relevant. So everything works really, really, really well.
Thank you. Well, we pay them after this.
Yes, sir.
This RFP is not worth it. And congratulations, you now don't have possibly the best solution that you need, because you wanted us to spend 2 months of some consultant's time answering a bunch of questions that you aren't even going to look at.
Right.
Yeah.
So
like 60 questions, 70 questions we think is reasonable. What's the longest questionnaire you've had to fill out for one of your vendors?
It's the people that have something in relationship with the Smurfs, and it was about 450 questions all across 13 different tabs.
Yeah, and depending on how you answer one question, it opens up multiple subsections. Yeah.
People that are archers take all the questions.
But that's when that happens, I turn to myself and say, we're not answering that. That's something that's being for me to do.
Yeah. Yeah, so we send out our secondary questionnaire surveys. We also ask for evidence gathering. So what's the scope? How long are you going to support us? What happens when we decide to terminate our contract? How are you dealing with our data at that point? How are you purging it, returning it to us? How do we ensure that you're still following security practices of that? Then third-party reports. Professional third-party reviewer. We're in a relationship with a group called Coral. They'll jump on conference calls with us. They'll schedule conference calls. They'll look for evidence. They'll go out and search the internet for breaches, any kind of history they can find on that company as well.
Yeah, so one of the...
It's their job to assess your assessment.
Yeah. So just...
I mean, not just that it's somebody in your company does it.
Yeah.
There's actually a business that's...
Yeah, so just make sure it's unbiased. So, sometimes people are like, oh, well, this assumption, well, they don't like this unit because they always want to get more vendors. So we're like, well, we'll just have someone else that doesn't even know you follow up like, well, this is a high vendor based on everything they found, based on how they answered our questionnaire. So we'll send them our questionnaire. They'll map it to different standards as well. We're like, well, you go on High Trust. They failed like 4 tier 1 High Trust requirements. Obviously, that's a high-risk vendor, and we're going to need more assurances, or like, hey, this is what we need you to do in this next 2-3 quarter span to fix your security posture. So not only do we assess them, like, hey, with the help of Core, like, this is what this company needs to do. We'll give them suggestions on how to improve their own security posture to help us.
Yeah. And that comes because, again, vendor security management, there are people probably doing this for years, but they weren't probably labeled the vendor security management team. But they're before this process began in 2013, we had over 1,000 vendors we already had a relationship with, and they weren't going anywhere. So it's so you're part of vendor security management. It's like, oh, okay, going forward, we can do, let's say, this pretty decent evaluation. But what about the people that already exist? So we brought in this third party to help us evaluate everyone and have a idea of who we needed to go back and help bring them up to compliance. Yes.
So a question, and I'm not sure, it may be something you guys want to cover later, but so in all of this makes perfect sense. A lot of times we'll deal with a vendor that has multiple offerings, right? And one is completely unrelated to the other. And so how do you address that coverage when the question goes out? Say, for example, you send something to Cisco, right? Cisco has, you're looking at dealing with them, they have different solutions. For example, Meraki, which is a cloud managed, we're retail in all of our stores, we have this solution out there. Somebody gains access to the Meraki Cloud portal and they can really cause havoc and get your stuff, right? But you're not trying to really assess all of Cisco. You're trying to assess a subset of that.
Right,
exactly.
And that's probably more a subset of the subset. So how do you take a questionnaire and shoot it off to somebody and let them address it? And how do you, and obviously an external entity that can do some digging on your behalf is awesome, but how do you validate that that's accurate to any sense of?
So a part of that is we can use the questionnaire to get things going, but the other portion is like in the very beginning you're wanting a service internally. I want a service. I want this service, and I want this service for this department or this group of people. I need as much clarity as I can from my internal person. What is it that they want? What is the need? From there, I go to Cisco and I say, hey, based off of what they said that they need, now I need to know like what your security posture is around what you're providing us on this. I'm interested in your security program. I'm interested in your privacy program, like posture, just to see how you're behaving or how you would potentially behave. If you only have one security person, no privacy person, that security person is everybody. I'm going to probably want to get on the phone with you and talk, more about like how do you handle this and how do you handle that, and whereas if I'm able to determine, hey, you have like a 10-person staff security team and 5-person staff privacy team, I'm going to have a little bit more faith in your responses and not think that I needed to take it a next level, especially when I'm not only asking for responses, but evidence of your certifications and evidence of the company certifications to back up this posture that you have. And then use a third party to do an independent review and validate what you said.
So after all these security assessments, after our third party goes in, after we have a follow-up conference call, so if you answer a couple of questions that we're not happy with, we'll jump on a call with you, ask for clarity. If we're still not happy, we'll ask you to bring in an architect or something, explain a little more detail. And after that, if we're still not happy, then we have to have a business owner sign off on the risk. They have to accept the risk.
And then you'll find that your company will engage with people who have no security program and who have no privacy officer, and they don't even have like a password on their computer. It's like, and it's like they want to do business with them, and it's like we can say we don't recommend because of this risk, but what we found around that is like if we're going to engage the mom and pop shops, or we're going to engage the running wild type people with their hair on fire, then they're going to go through our training. They're going to use our equipment, like someone was speaking of earlier, and they're going to be our contracted hire, and we're going to monitor them just as hard as we would monitor the person that's asking for it.
You're going to be their security proxy.
Yeah, we bring them into our processes. We bring them into, and most of those people and most of those places are so happy to forego a long security document and join the team. Basically, taking on our training, passing our training, taking on our equipment, and hey, work away.
Yes.
Another benefit to that approach is you go to stakeholders and say, okay, this is the risk.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically hangs the risk on them.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
That's been effective in our organization, telling the stakeholder, hey, you want to bring this guy in because he's your brother-in-law or whatever. That's fine. Okay, but if he screws up, it'll be your name on all the emails. It'll be your name on it.
Exactly.
And all of a sudden, his brother-in-law didn't look at quite as attractive anymore. And And so sometimes you do have to play those kind of games.
And another thing I've learned is, people aren't as malicious as it seems. They're just ignorant, like they don't know any better. And if you have like information to give them about that, money talks. Like if you say, "Hey, we could go out of business. We could be in breach of contract." That kind of stuff translates better than saying, "Oh, no, this is not some technical talk jargon." Blah 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 blah. It's like, look, if we do this, we're in jeopardy of this, that, and the other. If you make them aware of it, they'll sometimes grudgingly go along with it. And these are just the risk rankings.
So after our evaluation, third-party phone calls back and forth, we've got a MTN, minimum to no risk. So that's, if we're just buying software, we're hosting it, we're doing all the install. We're not going to require you to fill out a questionnaire. We just want it off the shelf. We'll do everything for you. So you're inside our data center. We do all the security. No questionnaire required. Similar to that, that also goes along, hey, you're a contractor, you're coming in, we're giving you our training, you're getting our laptop, you're getting our badge, you're getting a VDI, everything comes from us. Nothing is personal. And obviously we finalize with the low, medium, high critical. With the critical, those are the ones where we'll actually reach out to that business owner and we're like, hey, we need you to sign off on this. Your name is on this. We're accepting all the risk. If anything goes wrong, you're the first person that they go to.
And they're just the beginning. The business owner is probably going to be your CIO, it's going to be your legal. You're going to throw everybody's attention on it. That's all those signatures are for. It's like, I'm telling you now so I can say I told you so later.
So, like Willie said, we'll go, legal will sign off, CIO, everyone signs the same form, knowing this business owner wants to keep using this vendor and hear all the risks that we've assessed. And then they get to justify to the CIO and legal. So additional asks, as Willie was alluding to earlier. So if they don't want to take our training, they have to validate that they provide training and have to give us a rubric or an outline of the training they provide for all their contractors.
And there's business continuity. These are the type of things that, besides the security questions, that you want these different things to help kind of validate or give more insight to their program. The training, as he said, the business continuity, disaster recovery plans, security requirement agreements, BAA, NDA, SOW, MSA. That's a business associate agreement, a non-disclosure agreement, a statement of work, master service agreement, legal and contracting information, privacy information, and a listing of all contact data for people that are on the account and their HR for verification. So that's one of the easiest things to slip up on is I'm doing business with Carbon Black and I'm actually allowing them on my network and they have access to my account. Well, Carbon Black is a different facility, different location. I don't know when he gets fired. I don't know what's going to happen during their day-to-day. So how am I to continue to be aware of who still has access to the accounts? Like everything that I'm doing in-house is working, but I have vendors that still have access to my account and they don't even work for Carbon Black anymore. Sorry to use your company. It's just
there you go. So if we have a vendor and on the questionnaire, one of our questions asks if they actually have sub-vendors that are going to perform tasks for us as well. So as soon as we find that out, we actually begin the whole process with them as well, and we won't complete the process with the main vendor until all his sub-vendors have completed it. So at that point, we're same process. We need training validation. You're getting the same questionnaire. So it slows down the process, but like we said, once you get financial on board, they're okay with slowing it down. It's rather we wait now than pay exponentially more later on.
Honestly, in the sales cycle, if this comes out in the beginning, it's not a problem. Yeah. What sucks is when you've done the technical part and you're like, all right, so let's move to contracts, and this comes up, that's when it becomes a pain. When you see this in the beginning, then you know that you account for it and you do it in parallel with the assessments that are going on.
Yeah, that's what we try to do with ours is financial. Once they get it, they kick us off. Then we send out our requirements on our questionnaires as they're working on everything else as well. Right, record keeping. You do all this work? Where are you storing it? Or is it just, everyone just has a filing cabinet? So centralized storage location. So we started using SharePoint, a couple other tools to just keep everything in track. Also, we have a shared email inbox. So Willie, myself, or anybody else that's helping us perform these, we'll send it up from one email. If the vendor responds, we all know we got it. And we'll just let each other know, hey, I want to pick this one up. I'll look at the questionnaire first. Once I'm done, I'll post it on the SharePoint site, let you guys go review what I thought. So it goes through at least 2 or 3 of us internally. Then if we're still confused, if we still have questions, we'll engage Coral as well. Then they'll review the entire questionnaire again. And then we'll kind of come together like, okay, these are the issues that we have with the questionnaire. What were you guys able to find with your research? Based on that, we'll engage the vendor, get them on a call, start an email chain, just so we have all the data ahead of us and are able to just work between each other. Yes.
Quick question, I get one more time. Did you develop SharePoint workflows or with all of that, or is it literally just a bucket of things get stored? And have you looked at something more formal like a GRC tool that actually has all that stuff potentially built in, but also takes it?
I got this.
So we from our stance, we dove into what existed and what tools that they were already were leveraging to handle the vendor payment and the vendor processing, the accounts payable, all that. It was Salesforce. So we tweaked Salesforce to basically just have a intake process for security, and that intake process would deliver notifications out to all the various different departments. We have looked at GRC tools for us in specific. There was a GRC tool that we wanted, but they wouldn't sign a BAA agreement, so we resort back to we go wherever finance, whatever systems that they're using. We can use our SharePoint. We use it for other type of intake things, but because they use that and they already have access to that, we wanted to plug into their system.
Yeah. So why audit purposes and organization, everything is a centralized location. We can all go in and play with it. Just add your name at the end of it or turn on comments. Speaking of audits, so we'll do internal and external audit with our vendors. So depending on the final risk ranking you have, we're going to review either, at least an annual review every 2 years or just periodic. So minimum to no risk, we started the audit process this past year. We'll go in every month. We'll pick 10 at random, and then we'll start we'll start the actual intake process with the business owner. And depending on how they then answer those questions, we can figure out if it's still a minimum to no risk, or if someone might have left some information off, or there was some sort of change in what they're going to do, and then we have to start the questionnaires.
People find ways around processes, and sometimes people will unintentionally do it, and sometimes they will intentionally say, hey, if I just say no to this, I'd never have to see Willie's face, and that's cool. Yeah. So that's what the audit is for, and I think we have one more slide.
Yeah. So annual evidence gathering. So if you say, hey, next year we're going to have a SOC 2 report ready for you, well, guess what? Next year we're going to ask for that SOC 2 report. We're going to keep asking about it until we get a copy. So any kind of evidence that we get this year, we're going to require of you as soon as you update it again. Mitigation follow through. So like I said, once we engage vendors and we figure out ways to improve their security posture, we'll discuss with them, hey, here's the timeline. This is what you can do to show us that, you want to continue the relationship with us and you want to improve your security posture to make us safer and yourself. Re-reviews, we start the process all over again as soon as there's a change in scope. So like you were saying, maybe we just want Meraki's this year. Well, next year we're going to buy something else. The whole process starts again. And inactive, like we said, if our business relationship ends, there's a whole nother set of questionnaires that get sent out. What have you done with our data? Are you following what we signed in our contract? How can you ensure to us that you did follow this process? Some quick tips. Always look for ways to automate. Automate when you can. When there's 2 people and there's 4,000 vendors, automation is your best friend. Try repeatable processes. So we've learned these questionnaires work for us. We adapt them as we go. Keep going. Simplify your grading. If they meet the requirement, yes or no. If it's close, they still meet it, 95%. Depending on the risk, they meet it. You don't want to start asking questions A through Z for one small thing. We use electronic attestation forms so we can email them, and there's always a copy. We save it to the SharePoint site. Try to get as much as possible. Identify all players, like we said, finance, procurement, legal, anyone we can get involved to help us in our process, to tunnel everyone in. We'll be best friends with them as long as possible. Integrate into existing processes. Like we said, we use SharePoint because finance uses SharePoint. Whatever everyone else is using, we're going to try to, meet them on their level and go from there. And then just centralize intake tool and process. And that is it. We're out of time.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys. So we'll be outside at the ISSA table if you guys do have questions.
My heart beat no more.